Welcome back to NeuroConversant Leadership, where we talk about effective communication, especially in the STEM workplace. I'm Jeremy Doran. I love helping technical people become excellent leaders. Speaking of leaders, are they made or are they born? According to Laura Watson, they're made. Let's listen. Laura, welcome.
Hello, Jeremy. Great to see you today.
It is so wonderful to have you on here. Can you give the audience just a couple minutes about what it is that you do and who you work with?
Absolutely. So my company is Venture Coaching International, and I do business and leadership coaching or development with small business owners and senior level executives. So a lot of those business owners are subject matter experts. They might be architects, they might be accountants, lawyers, for example. They really, know their subject matter and are experts in their area. And they have grown to the point where they now have their own companies or their own firms. And so they have moved from a doer of their profession into a leader of their own company. And so I work with those people across Canada and the U.S.
Wonderful. And are you working with them one-on-one or in groups? How does it work?
Yeah, I primarily work one-on-one with people. That's I really just love that personal engagement. And I don't have set curriculums that I coach people through. All of my work is highly individualized. So I create personalized coaching programs with each of my clients based on their goals and objectives and where they're at in their leadership development, which is why we keep things all one-on-one.
Wonderful. What are some of the challenges people have going from being doers, as you say, to being managers and leaders? What are some of the stumbling blocks that most people face?
I think one of the biggest, there's a couple of major stumbling blocks. The first one is, yes, that transition from doer to sort of manager or leader, because when you're doing, obviously you're getting the work done yourself. And when you transition into running your own company, now you need to get work done through others. And that can be a difficult transition because the type of people, especially that I work with, they're very responsible, they're accountable, they are used to getting results themselves. And so it's challenging to then move into how do you get results achieved through others. So that transition is a big one for people. And tied with that is when the idea of creating systems and processes for your business, because when you're just doing it yourself, you kind of got it all in your head and you know how you do what you do. And when you suddenly move to having a team or a number of people working with you, you have to get that knowledge out of your head and be able to transfer it to others and take advantage of the knowledge that those others have for contributing to the building of your systems and processes. So it's quite a transition from needing to do it all yourself to doing it through others.
And it's such a mindset shift that people need to go through because they've taken so much pride in what they produce. And now all of a sudden their job is not really to produce anything, it's to have someone else produce it. And what I always tell people is now the thing that you take pride in is your teams and your team's success.
Yes, and leading them, and really a leadership position becomes about the leader is there to create the vision, the mission, the goals and objectives for the organization or the team, no matter what size that is, because this could be a team internal to an organization as well. So the leader is there to set that vision and that focus, and then to want to share that, to communicate it to the team members so that they can be on board with it. Ideally, they would be contributing even to the creation of that mission and vision. And then the leader is there to support his people or her people to be able to achieve that vision, give them the tools, the processes, the knowledge, and the resources to be able to fulfill on that. And yes, it's a big mindset change.
There seem to be a few different layers of things in what you just talked about. And I kind of separate out leadership and management. And the leader, as you're saying, helps develop and explain the vision. And the manager is more enabling things to happen and get there. Mm-hmm. Very often it's the same person who's the manager and that leader. Do you look at them the way I do in their two separate roles, or how do you see that?
I do see it as two separate roles. So I think a common analogy is like, which hat are you wearing? Mm-hmm. And I like to use language from a book called Traction. Get a Grip on Your Business is the subtitle of that book. And they talk about an accountability chart versus an organizational chart in a business. Yep. And that accountability chart has a visionary. So that's the leader, that's the visionary hat, if you will, where they are setting that mission, that vision, the direction, that sense of where is the organization going. And then they have an implementer. That's the other hat that needs to be worn. So whether it's maybe a different people or maybe the same person, but it's definitely a different role, because the implementer is there to work with the leaders of the various teams, if there are multiple teams in the organization, and are there to implement the systems and processes that have been created and make sure that people have the tools and resources they need to get the work that needs to be done.
Wonderful. And you've been doing this for 25 years now?
Yeah, which makes me feel kind of old.
No, you started when you were 6. That's impressive.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, it's been over 20 years now because I just absolutely love the work. It's very fulfilling to, people generally start working with me because they may have reached some sort of crisis mode. They've got a big issue that they're dealing with, or they're feeling really stuck, and it's almost out of desperation that people reach out, but they do so, and then through our work together, I'm able to get the crisis dealt with. So we kind of triage matters to begin with, get that handled, and then get them moving forward with a proper, business plan and goals and objectives and action steps so that they can stay consistent with that. And it's very fulfilling to take someone who comes to me from a point of maybe crisis to where now they're moving forward consistently and achieving the goals and objectives and results that they always dreamed of, and ultimately have that life that they have dreamed about, because that's ultimately why they're building their business, is to create an amazing life for themselves. So it's very fulfilling work.
That's great. There's another book called The E-Myth, The Entrepreneurial Myth, and he talks a lot about how people have this vision for their life, and that's why they start a business, and then they find out that they work for themselves and their boss is a maniac and they get no rest.
Exactly. Yeah, I really like the E-Myth. I read that a number of years ago, and it really introduced that idea of the doer becoming the leader. And so E-Myth definitely talks about what needs to happen in that transition. What I like about Traction is it talks about how. And Traction does a great job, if you go to their website, of providing all the tools and resources for free. So it's great for small business owners. It makes it, obviously knowing what to do is important, but then knowing how to put it into place is the next step. And the Traction and their website with all their tools makes it easier to put it into practice.
Nice. Free is my favorite price. I'll put a link in the show notes to that. So if you've been doing this for 20 years or so, have you seen the issues that people have stay consistent, or have things evolved? What's changed?
Well, there's definitely themes to the issues that people deal with. There's always issues of, Focus, I think focus has become even more challenging because we live in a very distracted world. We also live in an instant everything world. So people put pressure on themselves to have to do things right away. And yes, we have to be responsive when we're in business, but we don't have to be reactive. So one of those themes I refer to as mental and emotional mastery. That's definitely a theme. Having that focus, having a plan that people can follow. And I'll be honest, I have struggled in the beginning with having business plans. I would set those goals and objectives because I knew that's what I was supposed to do, and then I did what everybody does. I ignored the document. It sat and collected dust for a year until maybe the new year rolled around. It's like, oh yeah, I got to get back on that. So having a plan, following a plan, super important. That's one of the themes. Having that focus, and then communication is a big issue. When these owners are used to doing things themselves, all that communication is kind of happening inside their head with a lot of self-talk. And now when they're responsible for getting work done through others, they have to learn to communicate in a different way. And so that's communicate and delegate, actually. So that's a big theme of work that I do with people is having them communicate in a way that's going to be more effective, because when the communication and the delegation is effective, then work moves forward faster.
I'm so glad you brought up delegation, because I was just about to.
Okay.
I talk to people about delegation, and when I bring it up, half the people in the room roll their eyes, and almost invariably someone stands up and says, I tried it once, it doesn't work.
Oh, I hear that too, all the time.
Great. Let's start from the beginning and see how you delegated and what went wrong.
Exactly.
So when you're talking about delegation, can you explain to everyone the difference in how you see it between assigning tasks and delegating?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeremy. So like yourself, I find that a lot of owners are in that mindset of it's just easier to do it myself, or it's just faster to do it myself. And yes, they've probably tried some delegation. And often I find that when I dive into it with them and start to understand a little bit better about how they've been delegating, I find that some of their delegation has actually been abdication, which they've just told somebody, I want X, or do this, and send the person off and expect a week or 2 weeks or a month from now that something magical is going to appear on their desk and it's going to be done exactly how they wanted it done. That's abdication.
Yep.
Delegation is about sharing the expectations of sometimes a task or sometimes a project. And that's an important distinction right there. There are different levels of delegation. Sometimes you are delegating just a task depending on the person's skills and abilities that you're delegating to. And sometimes you're delegating a project, which means there may be parameters of that project that also need to be communicated. Parameters look like things like time frame and the expectations of the project, the results that need to be generated. Sometimes there's a budget attached to that project. So those are considerations to make when someone is delegating. Having milestones or check-in points along the way are also important, because you can't just expect something to magically show up on your desk a month later. You should have check-in points along the way to make sure that either the task or the project isn't getting derailed somewhere. Because often I've seen, the owners getting their whatever they've delegated back to them maybe the day of or the night before, and it's completely off track. And they didn't know that because they didn't have milestones, conversations booked along the way. So that's an important piece of the delegation as well.
You are speaking my language. I love it. I love everything you're saying.
It's all super important. And it's not that difficult. And it's just about knowing what to do and how to have that conversation. And so whenever I'm talking delegation with people, there's a great little book. I love resources and books. I don't want to reinvent the wheel with my clients. I'm always out finding the best resources there are available. And one of the best ones I've found is a book by Donna Gennett, and it's called If You Want It Done Right, You Don't Have to Do It Yourself.
Nice.
It's a 1-hour read. It's got cheat sheets in it. I love it. And one of the things that, and it's a nice little story. It's a story about two managers, they're neighbors. One manager is coming home every night, able to spend time with his family because everything's handled at the office. The other manager is coming home stressed out, wondering why he ever became a manager in the first place, can't spend time with his family because the office is still on his mind because things aren't getting done. So the struggling manager turns to his neighbor to say, what are you doing that I'm not? So it's a great little story about how to be effective that way. So
Nice.
That's a great little tool.
More show notes for me.
Exactly.
When you talked earlier, you were saying that delegation, but also communication is one of the things that you really like dealing with. What are some communication issues that people have when they first become managers, and then even that people continue to struggle with up through executive levels?
Sure. Again, a great question. So what I find, communication challenges come, again, we're talking about, managers, owners who are very responsible people. And so they're used to solving problems. And they're used to solving problems themselves. And so it may not sound like we're talking about the same thing, but we actually are, in that I find that a lot of my owners solve too many problems. So one of the challenges they come up against is not knowing when a problem is theirs to solve and when it isn't, and how to make those distinctions and what communication skills to bring to the table depending on the situation that you're dealing with. So when I'm working with people on communication issues, we always begin with a model that I love to use called a relationship GPS, because there are different communication skills to use depending on where we're at, if you will, in our relationship with this other person. So having that GPS handy and knowing about it helps us navigate that relationship and use the appropriate communication skills at the right time. So that's one piece. And knowing also, and then a big communication skill that people need to learn and be more effective with is listening. And I like to tell people, listen twice as much as you speak. Mm-hmm. And listen to understand. Often we're listening, but we're only kind of half-hearted listening because we're not listening to understand. We're listening to respond. Like, what's the next thing we're going to say? Or, I need to get my point across. And so people really need to listen to understand, because that's the whole point of communication, is to create mutual understanding. If we have mutual understanding between ourselves and the other party, then we can solve problems more effectively. We know what problem is ours to solve. We know what problem is somebody else's to solve. And then the leader, if it's somebody else's problem to solve, the leader can show up as a facilitator of problem solving, not a fixer of problems. And that's also a big distinction. So those are a couple of things that I like to focus on when I start working on communication skill development with people, is understanding the relationship GPS, what skills to use depending on where you're at in the relationship, and then really developing their listening skills.
Two things. Is the relationship GPS an actual tool, or is that just how you describe a process you go through?
It's a tool, yes. I guess I don't like reinventing the wheel. Years ago, when I first started my communication work, I came across a book called Leader Effectiveness Training by Thomas Gordon. And I actually got certified with that group. They have a whole series of books that are, although it's called Leader Effectiveness Training, it's really communication skills. And they have a whole series. They have leader effectiveness training, they have sales effectiveness training, they have parent effectiveness training, and they even have teacher effectiveness training. So they've just applied communication skills to those various audiences. So this GPS that I'm referring to, in their material, they call it a behavior window, because what they talk about is that when we're relating to another person, we have to talk about the behaviors that we're noticing or experiencing from that other person, not our judgment of that other person. And that, again, is another big distinction, because we tend to make assumptions, we tend to judge people too quickly. It's like, oh, that person's irresponsible, that person's lazy. Those are judgments versus describing a behavior such as the report was submitted late. And those are just a setup for how our communication is then going to follow along. And it's important, because those distinctions are what keep the communication channel open with the person that we're communicating with. So yes, the GPS is a tool that comes out of leader effectiveness training in that behavior window, and it's a really great tool for helping, again, people understand where are they at in the relationship with this other person, and what skills do they need to use depending on where they're at.
I love it. And you talked about listening more than speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, that's easy. For some people, it's really a challenge. Are there any strategies, tips, or tricks you have to help people who struggle with listening actively?
Breathe. We often, if we don't like what we're hearing, our emotional temperature starts to go up, our breathing actually changes, and that's when we get into that, oh, how am I going to respond? Or, oh, this person's ticking me off. Breathing can help calm us down. It can help us stay present to that other person. And there really are two primary listening skills. They're divided according to passive listening and active listening. Passive listening are the things that we do to help demonstrate that we are engaged with that person. It's things like having eye contact. It's the nodding of our head. It's the, yeah, I'm hearing you. So those are important things to bring to the table. And then active listening is where we paraphrase back to someone what we are hearing them say. Because for communication to be effective, it needs to be clear. There needs to be that mutual understanding that we spoke about earlier. And where misunderstandings happen is where we're hearing something, we're making an assumption or a judgment about what we're hearing, and then we start communicating based on our assumption versus clarifying our assumption or our understanding first. So that's really the first step that needs to be taken, is when someone is communicating with us, we can paraphrase back what we're hearing so that we can confirm understanding. And if the understanding isn't there, it gives the speaker an opportunity to clarify what they were trying to communicate and to ensure that understanding before the conversation, moves forward. So if people can kind of put what their own agenda on the back burner temporarily, stay present, in the conversation, breathe, not run with their assumptions, and always be using that active listening skill to confirm clarity, I think that'll go a long way to making their communication more effective.
Perfect. Those are great things for all of us to both learn and remember in the moment. Sometimes in the moment is when it gets hard to remember those things.
It does get hard in the moment, because especially if we're hearing something that is awkward or upsetting or we don't want to hear, that's when our emotional temperature rises. And as our emotional temperature rises, the emotion takes over and we can become reactive. And when we're emotional, we can't be logical. It just doesn't work at the same time. So that's where that breathing can help. That's when the active listening can help, so that our emotional temperature can come down and we can move from reaction mode back into responsive mode and be much more effective.
And I always tell people, I tell people to breathe. When something triggers an emotion in you, take the time to breathe. And you can pause a lot longer than you feel like you can. Silence is okay. It feels awkward and people want to jump in. It's okay to just take your time.
It absolutely is. Silence is a powerful communication tool. When we, for example, if a leader is asking a question of someone and they're not responding right away, sometimes the leader feels tempted to jump in and provide the answer or ask another question. And that's the opposite of what they should do, because it actually lets the person they're asking the question of kind of off the hook. So they can just use silence. The silence gives the person they're speaking with an opportunity to think about their response, and gives them the message that a response is expected. They're not off the hook on this matter, and whatever the response is, the leader really is interested in hearing what they have to say.
I'm the youngest of 10 kids, and my mother used silence very effectively. She would ask you a question, and I would always give the highest level answer with the least amount of detail, and then hope that she would ask me a question about that, because once she asked me a question, then I could totally skip over the things I didn't want her to know. She would never do it. She would just sit there and wait 5 more seconds. And then once she waited that long, I said what the most important thing on my mind was, which was normally the thing I didn't necessarily want her to know. So she was a master at that.
Your mom sounds brilliant.
So we need to start wrapping up shortly, but I know I like to be respectful of people's time.
I could go on all day on this stuff.
How much of what it takes to be a leader is innate in people, and how much of it is something that can be taught and learned?
Oh, awesome question. Because some leaders do, I think, come to the table with some inherent ability, just natural charisma sometimes, and just seem to fall into it. But that's actually not the case for most leaders out there. There was an old belief that leaders are born, and I don't believe that. Leaders aren't born; they are made. And leadership encompasses a number of skills, quite a few skills, but a number of skills that are all learnable. Definitely, there's all kinds of literature out there, resources and tools if someone's willing to read. There's, obviously workshops and retreats. And then there's people like myself who are leadership coaches who can, I think, over time we've learned, what makes a strong leader, and we can help people develop those skills quickly because we can be really targeted. If you read a book, sometimes you can get the concepts, but then it becomes hard to put them into practice when you get back to the office the next day and just get bombarded with email and phone calls. So I think that's where coaching can be super helpful, because it can be so targeted. It can actually help people learn the necessary skills much faster and put them into practice quickly. So absolutely, leadership is a learned skill, and one that can be fascinating, to learn as well, and is applicable in all areas of our life. We're not just talking about leadership in the office. Communication skills, for example, people are going to take those home and use them with their family. You're like your mom did. So we get to use them in our business partnerships and our personal partnerships at home and with our children. So it's another reason why I love talking about communication, because it has such far-reaching impact throughout our personal and professional lives.
The other thing I really like about coaching for leadership versus, or in addition to reading and resources, is that it doesn't look the same for everyone. There are effective leaders who, two of them may look and act completely different from each other, but both of them are able to be effective in their own way.
Absolutely. I was just listening to a book about that last week, and there used to be, and I guess there still is, a focus on what's your leadership style. And you have to know your style and then lead according to your style. And leaders need to be flexible with their style and adaptive, because obviously they're leading all kinds of different people, and they, rather than showing up and thinking they can only have one set style, I think it's important for leaders to understand that they can be adaptive. And one thing that makes them effective is showing up and meeting the people they're leading where they're at, and being, really present to them and adapting themselves to how their people are showing up.
Laura, I love everything that you've talked about today, but we do need to start wrapping up. Before I ask you my 3 standard questions, how can people reach out to you and or find out more about you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I'm always open to having a conversation. So people can find me at my website, which is venturecoaching.ca, because I'm based in Canada. That's probably the best way to find me. And once they get there, there's a free tab. You mentioned you like free stuff. So I've got a number of free resources in the form of ebooks on my site that people can download. And I even offer a free coaching session. So that my website's a great place, and they can also easily find me on LinkedIn at the Laura Watson. So those are probably the best 2 places.
Wonderful. All right. Now getting into the questions. What is a place you've traveled and loved, and a place you have not yet been but want to go?
A place we traveled and loved a number of years ago was Hawaii. Mm-hmm. We went to Kauai, we went to the Big Island, and being on the Big Island and standing just a couple of feet away from flowing lava and just seeing the earth alive was absolutely incredible. So Hawaii is one of those places I've been, and one of the places I want to go is New Zealand and Australia. Ever since Lord of the Rings came out and I saw those amazing vistas, I definitely want to get to New Zealand and see those places for myself.
Great choices. Who is a person who you think is a great communicator, whether in your personal life or a famous person?
I'm going to pick my husband. When I mentioned that I became trained in this communication stuff a number of years ago, and he and I actually have done this work together. And so we really, it was important to us in raising our family first and foremost. And so he embraced the skills as well, and he has become a fabulous communicator. Our kids are now in their 20s, and it's so cool when they call one of us and say, "Hey, Dad, I need a little coaching." And so he's become a fabulous communicator, when years ago he was first told, "You're not a very good listener." So he's come a really long way.
With both of you being effective communicators, that makes for a great relationship.
It has transformed our marriage, absolutely. So, yes, very, very powerful.
Wonderful. And what is one piece of communication advice you think everyone can benefit from?
I'm going to go back to the piece I said earlier, which is listen twice as much as you speak. I like the expression, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them accordingly.
Love it. All right, Laura Watson, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here today.
Thank you so much for listening to NeuroConversant Leadership. If you found this beneficial, can you do me one small favor? It'll be quick, I promise. Can you go and give this podcast a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever it is that you listen before doing anything else? Unless you're driving. If you're driving, then I need you to keep driving. And then when you're done and parked, then go ahead and give me a review. Hopefully 5 stars, but whatever you are comfortable honestly giving. Thank you and have a great day.